Welcome to NumPy and Pandas Tips, Tricks, and Techniques Section 4. In this section, we're going to be talking about aggregation and subsetting. In this first video, we're just going to talk about aggregation. So as we've started some other notebooks here, we're going to import Pandas. We're also going to import Pandas Data Reader to get some external data. And the external data I'm going to get is just some stock pricing information about Apple. About a year's worth of data here for Apple. And then I'm just going to go through some methods of aggregating. All right, so the primary method that we aggregate by is with the group by method of a data frame. All right, and in this first example, I am wanting to aggregate by year, and it's a little different when you aggregate by indexes, and then it's still a little bit more different when you aggregate by an index that's a date. So I'm also going to have to call this PD grouper method or PD grouper function inside the group by. Okay, once I do that, I specify a frequency, and I have some examples of frequencies you can use up here. All right, so we can get quarterly, weekly, monthly, all right, a specific weekday, and here I'm going to use yearly. So when I run that, I get all the data points and their average over a different period. Okay, so here's the entire year of 2018 that we have, and then the portion of the year that we have for 2019 and all those means. All right, so that's pretty straightforward. All right, one of the things that isn't so straightforward is the use of this PD grouper function. All right, but you can also aggregate by multiple points if you want. All right, so let's say I want the mean, standard deviation, and the number of observations all in one table, and I just want it for the closing price. So again, I'll call group by. I'll use the PD grouper because I'm working with a dated index. I'll use the same frequency. Okay, we'll get it yearly. All right, and then instead of just hanging off something like the mean, I'm going to hang off the aggregation method, and then I'm going to specify what aggregations I want in a list. Okay, so we can see just like that, we end up with a fairly common table that may require lots of lines of code, and we've done it all in one line. Okay, let me show you a couple more examples of this where it may not be so obvious some of the aggregations you can use. So if I, again, call Apple group by with my grouper, all right, I'll change the frequency here, and we'll get quarterly data. All right, and notice I haven't specified which column, so right now it's going to give me whatever aggregation method I want for all the columns. All right, again, I'm going to call aggregation. And now I can use a dictionary to split off some keys. So if I want the close and I want the average there, I specify it. And then if I want, say, the volume, I can get the volume, and then I can actually specify a different summary statistic here, so I can get something like the minimum. Okay, so when I run that, we get the average price over for the close over the quarters, and then we get the smallest volume. All right, so the data is not necessarily aligned, all right, but it's just meant to give you a demonstration of some of the things that are possible using group by that may not be so obvious. Okay, next up, I'm going to move on to the data set we've been using, the fictitious sales orders. And what I'm going to do here after I load the data is to show another method of group by, which looks basically like a pivot table. All right, and we do have a pivot table, which I'll talk about toward the end here. So if I group by and then in list notation, specify multiple columns, okay, then outside I can look at a different column, say units here, and I can get the totals. All right, so what we're going to get here is for each item and each region, how many units were sold. Okay, and if I want to look at it as a Pandas pivot table, I can do that. So I call data and then pivot table. Okay, the data I want to analyze is units. And then I specify columns and rows. So with index, I get the rows. And so I'll use region. And then with columns, I get the items. Okay, the syntax is a little different here. I specify how I want to aggregate it right inside the pivot table method with aggfunc. All right, it defaults to mean if you don't specify. But I'm going to get basically the same data as I have above. All right, a slightly different presentation. All right, here I ended up with the series. Here I'm ending up with the data table or data frame. Okay, now I'm going to look at a new data set. We haven't seen this one before. Again, it's fictitious, and it's made up of fictitious survey data where we're recording various attributes of individuals and their income. So we'll take a quick look at that. Again, it comes with the supplements that are available for download. And so just to give us an idea, we're going to get an age, whether or not they're married, and the income here is in thousands. We have some other interesting data points here too, how much they spent on their car and their education level. Okay, so I'm going to use this to sort of create a sorted or a frequency table of income by age. So to do this, I'm going to set up a variable called age, and I'm going to use this function in Pandas called cut. All right, and here I'm going to associate it with the variable income and then the column age. All right, and then I'm going to apply how I want to cut it. So I'm going to go from 0 to 20, and then after 20, I'm going to go every 10 years. Okay, we'll stop at 70. Okay, and then to apply this to our data, I'm going to look at the data frame income, and then I'm going to apply pivot table. I'm going to get income. I'm going to index by that age variable I just made. And then I'm going to add some columns. So we're going to break it out by the gender. Okay, so you can see that cut gives us a method of binning our data any way we want. And then I apply it to a pivot table, so I can apply it to group by as well. But here I'm applying it to a pivot table, and I can then break out and analyze other variables. So that should give you some ideas about how to use aggregation using group by and pivot table in Pandas.